some of these sort of higher profile races like Steny Hoyer's? Do we know? We're basically we don't have any results. We don't have that many results yet, do we?
Well, in Maryland, we do have. I mean, Steny Hoyer was up big.
Right.
I don't see how they claw that back. I mean, he's a member. When you're a member of leadership in the House, it is a really hard challenge. And I think Michaela Wilkes, she ran into really the headwinds of COVID. Like, a lot of these challengers, especially in congressional races, a big part of it, what AOC used to beat Joe Crowley, and what Ayanna Pressley used to beat Mike Capuano was really a grassroots, door-knocking centered campaign that you just can't do in COVID. But in these, in state legislative races, on the other hand, it's a lot easier to make a difference. It's a lot easier to access the grassroots. Like in Philadelphia, Nikhil Saval, who is ahead big on incumbent Larry Farnese, he had a very extensive digital and mail program that was aimed at, it's a smaller segment of voters. And so it's a lot easier for something like that to catch on than, Michaela Wilkes. She just had a much bigger district without the ability to really run the grassroots campaign she wanted. So it's just, it's very difficult to knock off an incumbent with that in a pandemic conditions. That's
going to be a big dynamic, right? I mean, I feel like we had, as far as I can tell, the deepest and biggest pool of progressive challengers to sitting incumbent Congress people, and I would imagine, state Senate, on the state level as well. Although I don't know that, and you'd know that better. That I feel like I've ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, is that just in terms of sheer numbers and quality of candidates? Is that the case? And if so, COVID is going to play a big role in keeping those sort of upset races down, the number of those upset victories down.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's been an obvious trend toward more of them. And I think the thing to keep in mind with these is that it's not a one electoral cycle fight. I mean, you look to Illinois, for example, Marie Newman barely falls short in 2018, comes back in 2020 and wins the primary. Right. And I think especially going into 2022, that is a redistricting cycle. And that means that all these incumbents, every single one in the country, is going to have at least some new turf that they have to run on that they're not familiar with. And so, you see people, if you see someone fall short that you wanted to win this year, you really shouldn't despair, because 2022 is going to, you can see that these challenges tend to gain momentum over time, and that 2022, every incumbent's going to have new turf to defend. So I think you will see a lot more primary challenges. It'll continue to grow, and that I think they'll be even more successful in 2022.
Are there any other that we should mention? I don't know. Was I right to be surprised? I mean, I got to be honest with you. I don't follow New Mexico politics too much, but I just assumed because Valerie Plame had a sort of bigger national profile that she would win that race. But as far as I can tell, she did not, and that the Teresa Leger Fernandez, who beat her, is to her left.
Yeah, that in that primary, I think it's hard to say. I think there was a significant ideological overlap between the two, but Teresa Leger Fernandez had been in that district. She had specifically worked at organizing in Native communities, and that district is it's a sprawling rural area, very diverse, and if you have that experience organizing in disparate parts of it the way that she does, it really gives you a leg up. And so Plame hadn't lived there for nearly as long, hadn't been involved for nearly as long. And so, money certainly helps you win elections. Name recognition certainly helps you win elections. But if you have a presence in that community, if you have a record of helping out that community, that's also something that you can run on. And, Plame didn't have those things, and Leger Fernandez did.
All right, so let's talk about that explicit racist idiot Steve King in Iowa. He loses to, what is this guy's name? Feinstein or Fernstein?
Randy Feenstra.
Feenstra. And now you characterize it as it's the first time that somebody to the right within a Republican primary has lost, in a long time, or at least the most high profile. But we should also remind people, right? This guy Feenstra, he thinks COVID is a hoax. That it's his rhetoric is pretty xenophobic towards the Chinese. He was sort of running on the fact that it seems to me that King was no longer effective because he was incompetently racist, as opposed to just being racist, and therefore could no longer sit on committees, and therefore was not sufficiently supportive of Trump, or at least effectively supportive of Trump. Is that a fair characterization? I mean, what am I missing here? That, I guess you could say like being more explicitly racist as opposed to just like supporting racist policies, or a racist in the presidency is, I guess marginally to the left of Steve King, but yeah.
I think that's fair. I didn't say that he was, George Romney or Nelson Rockefeller, but he is marginally to the left of Steve King. If you look at that race, it really, it wasn't explicitly about King being too conservative, but it's kind of hard to, I'm not a big fan of ignoring the subtext. And the subtext of this race was Steve King is so far on the conservative fringe that he's an ineffective congressman. I will say it is notable that King, had been stripped of his committee slots. He really wasn't able to raise a lot of money, had very little establishment support, had this record of really, being, again, at the very fringe of the right wing, still came within 10% of winning.
Right.
And so, it's, I think as a net, it's, for anyone, it's good that he's gone. There's one less voice introducing the very fringe of the right wing, the Chuck Johnsons of the world, into the halls of Congress. And that, I think that's still a net good, even if Randy Feenstra will vote the same way. But yeah, it shows you that, it hasn't been cured. They haven't cured themselves of the, of the milieu that gives rise to someone like King.
Yeah, they won't. I don't think they're going to cure themselves of that for a long, long time. But is this one of those things where careful what you wish for? Because now, was there a chance that that guy J.K. Schulten, is that his name, Schulten?
J.D. Schulten.
J.D. Schulten could have won against King, less of a chance against Feenstra.
Yeah, Schulten came within 5% in 2018. In a presidential year, it's possible. It seems very unlikely that he would win just because Democrats don't need that seat. So they probably won't spend a ton of resources trying to win it. And especially after the next round of redistricting in Iowa, it seems likely that seat will probably get more conservative. And so it just doesn't seem like Schulten, because he's run against King, because he's, he has a big profile, he'll still be able to raise money. But I think he'll, the seat was on the board, but it was never really something that Democrats needed. So the net benefit of having Steve King out of Congress, I think, outweighs, whatever marginal benefit there was to having J.D. Schulten potentially keep that seat for one term.
Okay, fair enough. Let's just look ahead to next Tuesday, and then we'll talk about Wisconsin. What do you got about next Tuesday? Next Tuesday is another big primary day, but I imagine it's going to have the same sort of like it's going to land with a big splat, and we're not going to really know the results for some time in certain instances, right?
Yeah, all the states are still trying to figure out, especially states that have mail-in balloting is a relatively new phenomenon, or at least large mail-in balloting is a relatively new phenomenon. They're taking a while, and you're seeing that in Pennsylvania. This was their first cycle with no excuse absentee balloting, and so you're seeing there, it's disparate between counties on just like how quickly they can count these, and the smaller ones are just having a far easier go of it than the larger ones. And like states like Oregon and Colorado and California that have had extensive mail-in balloting in the past and are held up as paragons, they didn't go from 0 to 60 right away. It was a process that they developed the ability, the institutional know-how to count mail-in ballots over time. And even in California, it takes them weeks to count every ballot. And I think it's actually a relatively new phenomena where Americans expect election results to, like, on election night. In the if you go to the very beginning of the country, that just technologically wasn't possible. And I think we kind of
I know, but that was 250 years ago.
Yeah, but I mean, even like in the going back to the earlier in the 20th century, you just didn't get election results that quickly. It took a while to compile everything, and so.
Well, let me ask you this, Aaron.
We need to go back to that where we don't expect winners right away.
Aaron, we're not going to wait. We're just not going to. I'm not going to. I refuse to.
I know. Patience is a virtue.
But why don't they count the ballots as they come in?
It's one of those things where people develop these systems over time about counting ballots. And I think that, there are certain rules against actually like count, you can't like open I don't think in any state anyone actually like opens the ballots and counts the votes before election day. Or I think it's pretty uncommon and really, but it's really more an administrative task of just like being able to,
physically open up all those ballots.
Or scan them or, whatever procedures you have, because the most important thing that anyone working in election offices is to get the numbers right. That is the most important thing. And so that needs to be the imperative of way beyond, it's far more important than speed of reporting is getting the numbers right.
I think speed more important than getting the numbers right. I just want to know it. Let's find out. I'm joking, of course, Aaron. I'm a little cranky. Let's talk about this report that you guys did about Wisconsin. Wisconsin had two different primaries, which is or elections, I guess I should say, that were that which is in and of itself just insane. Like that's I guess we have a thing called best practices. That to me seems like worst practices. Forget COVID. Just the idea that you would have like, we're going to do an election a month apart because. But talk about why that's the case, and then what that provided a sort of natural experiment too, didn't it? Or at least some, I guess, maybe a research project.
Yeah. So Wisconsin, as many of you know, was really ground zero for the right wing's experiment in just totally dismantling public institutions. And, there was a backlash against that. People in the state consistently have decided, no, that's not what they want. In 2018, Democrats got a majority of the vote for basically everything they ran for. But because the state legislature is so gerrymandered and because the Supreme Court says that's totally fine, Republicans still hold a very large majority in the state legislature. And so when the governor, Tony Evers, said, hey, we're in the midst of a pandemic. Let's try to move these elections out until, people get a little, more health, until the pandemic subsides a little bit, maybe consolidate them. The Republican legislature, which thrives on making sure that people can't vote, said, no, we will not move this Supreme Court election scheduled in April, or we won't move it to mail-in balloting. We're going to force people to vote in person in the middle of a pandemic. And so, they held this state Supreme Court election. It was 2 months. I know it seems like 2 years ago, but it was only 2 months ago that they held this really prominent state Supreme Court election in the midst of the pandemic. And it was supposed to be close. I think heading into election day, people thought the conservative candidate was